Before I start, I want to ask something. Have you ever driven on a desert highway at night, where the road stretches so far ahead it feels like it's swallowing your headlights? Out here in West Texas, the land looks peaceful during the day. Endless scrub, burnt orange dirt, a sky so wide it feels holy. But when the sun drops, that beauty hollows out. The air goes still, the radio crackles, and the dark presses in from every direction. If you've ever been near a place like this, you already know what I mean. And if you haven't, listen closely. My name is Caleb R. Morrow. I'm a Texas Highway Patrol officer, stationed along a forgotten stretch of desert highway near the borderlands. I've worn the badge for 11 years. Out here, it's often one trooper covering 60, sometimes 70 miles alone. People think highways are predictable. Lines, speed limits, rules. But isolation changes everything. I thought I understood this job. I was wrong, because there are things I've learned out here that don't exist in manuals, aren't taught in training, and will never appear in an official report. I've rewritten this report more times than I can count. Not the official one, the real one, the version I can't submit, can't sign my name to, can't even say out loud without my throat tightening. If you're listening to this, you need to understand something first. I'm not prone to panic. I've worked fatal wrecks, body recoveries, nights where the heat never drops and the radio never stops screaming. I know what fear feels like. This was different. There are rules every trooper learns early, unwritten ones. Things passed down quietly. When to stop, when not to, when to keep driving no matter what you see standing on the shoulder. Those rules kept me alive for over a decade. They were simple, practical, boring. But a few months ago, on a stretch of desert highway everyone avoids talking about, they stopped working. And once you realize that, you can't unlearn it. By the time I transferred to this district, I'd already learned that the academy didn't prepare you for isolation. They taught procedures, codes, liability. They didn't teach you what to do when the road goes quiet for so long that your own breathing starts to sound unfamiliar. That part came later, from the veterans. The old rules weren't written anywhere. They were passed along in low voices, usually at the end of shift, when the coffee was burned and the sun was just starting to bleed back into the sky. You learned them the same way you learned where the rattlesnakes nested and which mile markers never got service. Slowly, carefully. The first rule was simple. Never stop for lone figures after midnight. Not pedestrians. Not hitchhikers. Not people waving you down like they've been waiting all night just for you. If someone was really in trouble, dispatch would know. If dispatch didn't know, you kept driving. The second rule followed close behind. Never follow unmarked detours. Not cones dragged into the road. Not handwritten signs nailed to posts. Not hazards blinking in the dark where construction was supposed to be finished months ago. If it wasn't logged, it wasn't real. You radioed it in, marked the location, and stayed on pavement. The third rule was the one that bothered new troopers the most. Never respond to calls that repeat verbatim. Same wording, same cadence, same pause between syllables. Once could be coincidence. Twice was a glitch. 3 times meant you acknowledged and stayed where you were. None of that was in the handbook. When I asked where those rules came from, the answer was always the same. Someone would shrug. Someone else would say, experience. No one ever said a name. My patrol covered a stretch of highway. Most people only remember when something went wrong. 2 lanes cutting through desert scrub, miles of nothing broken up by the occasional abandoned service road or rusted cattle gate. During the day, it looked harmless, even beautiful in a way. At night, it felt unfinished, like the land hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. Most shifts were quiet. You drove. You listened. You watched heat lightning flicker over the horizon and counted mile markers like a metronome. Sometimes you'd go hours without seeing another set of headlights. That kind of quiet gets inside your head if you let it. That's where Evan came in. Evan Reyes was fresh out of training when he got assigned to ride with me. Early 20s. Sharp uniform. Too much confidence and not enough sleep. He reminded me of myself before I learned how heavy the silence could feel. He asked questions constantly. Why we didn't stop for certain calls. why some things went straight into reports and others stayed between us. I gave him the safe answers first. Policy, jurisdiction, resource limits. Eventually, I gave him the real ones. These roads don't forgive mistakes. I told him one night, as we rolled past mile marker 143, and they don't always make sense. He laughed, nervous. That's not exactly comforting. It's honest, I said. I showed him how to log stops, how to position the cruiser, so the headlights covered more ground than the spotlight ever could. I showed him how to listen to the radio for what wasn't being said, the pauses, the overlaps, the way dispatch sometimes sounded like they were reading something instead of talking. What I didn't tell him, what no one ever told me outright, was that breaking the old rules didn't always get you hurt. Sometimes it just took your time. Veterans talked about it like a joke at first. Lost an hour back near Dry Creek. Swore I was gone 20 minutes. Dash cam said 2 hours. It was always brushed off. Fatigue. Faulty equipment. Desert heat. Doing strange things to electronics. But every story lined up the same way. A stop that shouldn't have happened. A detour that wasn't there before. A voice on the radio that sounded right, but felt wrong. I never tested the rules myself. Not until Evan started riding with me. If you've ever ignored your instincts because you didn't want to seem foolish, you already understand the pressure. The job trains you to be decisive, but the culture trains you to be quiet. You don't want to be the one seeing things that aren't there. You don't want to be the reason everyone else has to change how they work. So you tell yourself there's a logical explanation. You keep driving. Evan didn't have that filter yet. When he saw something strange, he leaned forward. When he heard a call that didn't sit right, he reached for the mic. I stopped him more than once. Not that one, I said. Why not? Because it's not for us. He accepted that at first. The night everything started to shift was calm. Too calm. No wind. No traffic. The radio silent long enough that Evan checked to make sure it was still on. We were somewhere between stations when a call came through. Single vehicle. Disabled. Mile marker we both knew was wrong. The wording was flat, identical to another call we'd heard earlier that week. Evan looked at me. I felt the old rule rise up in my chest, automatic and heavy. I didn't answer. The radio repeated the call. Same words. Same pause. Evan opened his mouth to say something. That was when I realized how thin the line really was. Between training and instinct. Between procedure and survival. Between teaching someone the rules and letting them learn why they exist. I tightened my grip on the wheel and kept driving. Behind us, the road stayed empty. Ahead of us, it didn't. Ahead of us, the highway curved just enough to hide what waited beyond the next rise. My headlights swallowed asphalt and scrub, nothing more. Evan relaxed back into his seat, tension draining the way it always did when nothing happened for too long. Then the radio clicked. Unit 7-2, respond to a disabled vehicle, mile marker 147. The voice was familiar. Same dispatcher we'd heard earlier, same flat tone. But the mile marker made my stomach tighten. That stretch of road didn't have a shoulder wide enough for a breakdown. I knew it the way you know the shape of your own hands. I didn't answer. The radio stayed quiet for 5 seconds. Then 10. Unit 7-2, the voice repeated, word for word, cadence identical. Respond to a disabled vehicle, mile marker 147. Evan turned toward me. That's us. I know. So we're not taking it? I slowed slightly, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Does that mile marker make sense to you? He hesitated. No, but dispatch wouldn't. Dispatch isn't always dispatch. I said, cut him off more sharply than I meant to. We drove another half-mile before the radio crackled again. This time, the voice stuttered. Not in the words. In the timing. Like someone had pressed play a fraction of a second too late. Be advised, it added. Caller states they've been waiting a long time. That was new. I radioed in, careful with my phrasing. Dispatch, confirmed disabled vehicle at 147. The response came back too fast. Confirmed. No unit number. No acknowledgement of my call sign. Evan frowned. That's not protocol. I know. Procedure said we verify. Procedure said we respond. The old rule said something else entirely. I felt them pressing against my ribs, heavy and insistent, against my better judgment. I slowed to a stop just short of the mile marker sign. The number gleamed back at us in the headlights. Chipped and faded. 147. There, Evan said, pointing. I followed his gaze and felt my mouth go dry. A sedan sat half off the road, hazard lights blinking. Clean, intact, like it had been placed there deliberately. The engine wasn't running. No dust on the tires. No heat shimmer rising from the hood. It shouldn't have been there. I knew that with certainty that had nothing to do with superstition. Evan was already unbuckling. I'll make contact. Wait, I said. He paused, hand on the door. Sir, with respect, this is exactly what we're supposed to do. I looked at the cruiser clock. 1:17. I logged to stop manually, even though the system should have done it for me. It didn't. 5 minutes, I said. You don't see anyone, you come straight back. He nodded and stepped out into the dark. The desert swallowed him almost immediately. No wind, no insects. The hazard lights clicked in the distance, the sound unnaturally loud. I watched him approach the sedan. He knocked on the driver's window. Once, twice. He circled the car, flashlight beams slicing through the interior. No one inside. Unit 7-2, he radioed. Vehicles empty. I exhaled slowly. Copy. Come back. There was a pause. Sir, Evan, come back. Now. Another pause. Longer this time. I found something, he said finally, against every instinct I had. I got out of the cruiser. The heat hit me first. Not from the engine, from the ground itself, like the asphalt had been holding on to the day's warmth just beneath the surface. Evan stood a few feet from the sedan, staring down at the dirt. Footprints, barefoot, leading away from the driver's side door. One set, no return prints. They didn't sink into the soil the way they should have. They looked pressed on, stamped. Dispatch didn't mention a pedestrian, Evan said. They didn't mention a lot of things. I replied. I radioed it in, gave a location, requested another unit. The response came back distorted, stretched thin, like the signal had to travel farther than it should have. Copy, the voice said. Not the same dispatcher. Not any dispatcher I recognized. We searched the immediate area. Called out. Listen. The desert gave nothing back. No echoes. No movement. Just silence thick enough to feel. I checked the sedan more closely. Registration was current. No signs of struggle. Phone on the passenger seat. Screen dark. Still warm, like it had been held recently. How long do you think they've been gone? Evan asked. I didn't answer, because the honest response didn't make sense. When the backup unit arrived, their dash cam timestamp didn't match ours. Off by 43 minutes. They swore they'd been only 5 miles away when they got the call. By sunrise, the missing person had a name. Laura Bennett, 36, driving through to visit family. Last ping from her phone placed her exactly where we'd found the car. Search and rescue combed the area for 2 days. Dogs lost the scent almost immediately. Helicopters spotted nothing but scrub and shadow. Evan tried to rationalize it. Heat exhaustion, disorientation, a bad decision that led her off the road and out of sight. He trusted procedure because procedure was all he had. I filed the report the way I was supposed to. Left out the parts that didn't fit. The footprints, the radio delays, the way the hazard light stopped blinking the moment the sun came up. That night, back on patrol, the clock in our cruiser read 032 when we passed mile marker 147 again. The call came through at 031. Same words, same voice. Only this time, it used Evan's name. After the call that used Evan's name, nothing felt theoretical anymore. The highway didn't look different, but it felt aware of us in a way it hadn't before, like something had shifted its attention. Evan tried to joke it off, blaming coincidence and stress, but his eyes kept flicking to the radio, to the mirrors, to the dark just beyond the reach of the headlights. The land we patrolled had a history far older than the pavement cutting through it. Long before mile markers and dispatch codes, people had crossed this desert carefully, deliberately. The land wasn't empty. It was reserved. Every arroyo, every rise of stone had a memory attached to it. Not legends the way outsiders think of them, but practical knowledge. Where to walk, where not to linger, what the land tolerated and what it did not. You didn't learn those things from textbooks. In the nearby towns, locals spoke around certain subjects the way you speak around a wound that hasn't healed. If you asked directly, they deflected, changed topics, smiled politely, and excused themselves. But if you listened long enough, patterns emerged. Stories about travelers who left the road and were never found, about stretches of desert where time felt wrong, about hearing voices carried too far at night. One afternoon between shifts, I stopped at a small diner just off the highway. The kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted burnt no matter how fresh it was. The owner, an older man named Henry Salgado, had lived there his entire life. He knew the desert the way you know a person you've grown up with. Fond, cautious, realistic. I didn't ask him about the disappearance. Not directly. I asked him if there were places out there people avoided. He wiped down the counter slowly, buying time. There are places you don't go unless you're invited. He said finally. Invited by who? Evan asked. Henry looked at him for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to me. You already know better than to ask that. What happens if someone goes anyway? I said. He shook his head. That's the wrong question. He poured himself a cup of coffee. He didn't drink. The land keeps what it's given, he said. Sometimes that's water. Sometimes it's bones. Sometimes it's time. Evan laughed uneasy. So superstition? Henry's expression hardened. No, boundaries. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. If you wear that uniform long enough out there, you'll start to notice places your radio doesn't work right. Places your tires sound different. Places you feel watched even when you're alone. When that happens, you don't push. You back away. Why? Evan pressed. Henry straightened. Because it's not yours. That was all he would say. Back at the station, I started paying attention to things I'd ignored before. Maps with sections circled in pencil. Old memos that advised alternate routing without explanation. Veterans who avoided certain mile markers, no matter how pressed we were for coverage. There were zones we weren't officially forbidden from entering, but everyone knew better. Washes where vehicles broke down inexplicably. Service roads that never appeared on updated maps. Stretches of land supervisors referred to vaguely as problem areas. No one ever put it in writing. Evan noticed my change in behavior. You're double-checking everything, he said one night as we rolled past a fenced-off dirt road. That road doesn't exist, I replied. It's right there. Not on any map that matters. He frowned. That's not how this works. That's exactly how this works, I said, more tired than angry. The weight of Laura Bennett's disappearance sat between us, unspoken. The report had moved up the chain and quietly stalled. No updates. No new searches. Her name became another line in a system built to absorb loss without acknowledging it. I started questioning things I'd accepted for years. Protocols designed for cities, not open desert. Response times that assumed help was always minutes away. The idea that every problem had a procedural solution. Some nights, the radio lagged just enough to make me doubt my own timing. Calls came through stamped with times that hadn't happened yet. Evan pointed it out once, tapping the display. That's not possible, he said. Neither is most of this, I answered. Sleep became difficult. When I did manage it, I dreamed of roads folding on themselves, of mile markers rearranging overnight, of voices calling my name from places I couldn't reach. Evan started carrying his rule book with him, flipping through it during quiet stretches. I could tell he was looking for reassurance, something solid to anchor himself to. I didn't take that away from him. Not yet. One night, we responded to a minor call near a known problem area. Nothing dramatic, just a report of debris on the road. But as we approached, the air changed. Thicker, heavier. The radio hissed, then went silent. I slowed the cruiser instinctively. You feel that? Evan asked. Yes. We didn't cross the boundary. Not consciously. We just stopped, turned around, logged it as resolved without ever seeing the debris. Later, I couldn't explain why. The old rules had always been about safety, about survival. Now I started to understand they were also about respect, about recognizing limits that couldn't be enforced with authority or lights and sirens. Evan wasn't there yet. He still believed every situation could be met head-on, solved, documented, closed. I watched him struggle with that belief, saw the cracks forming. If the desert was keeping something from us, it wasn't doing it out of malice. It was doing it because it could, because it always had. And the more we learned, the more I realized the rules weren't failing, because they were wrong. They were failing because we were being tested. The next time Evan broke one, it wouldn't be out of curiosity. It would be to save someone. After that night, I followed the old rules perfectly. No hesitation. No exceptions. I logged every call, double-checked every mile marker, and ignored anything that didn't align with training or experience. Evan noticed. He called it being careful. I knew better. I was scared. For a while, it worked. The radio behaved. The clock stayed in sync. The desert went back to pretending it was just land and sky and empty road. I almost convinced myself we'd imagined the cracks forming, that Laura Bennett's disappearance had been a tragic anomaly we could explain away with enough paperwork and distance. Then the call came in just before 2 a.m. Single vehicle accident. Roll over. Mile marker 152. The dispatcher sounded normal. Different phrasing. No repetition. Everything by the book. That mile marker was clean, open, documented. No history. No warnings. No whispered stories from veterans who suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. We acknowledged and responded. As we approached, headlights caught debris scattered across the road. Glass. Twisted metal. A pickup truck rested on its side in the dirt, steam rising from the hood. A man stood a few yards away, waving both arms frantically, illuminated in harsh flashes of blue and red. Every rule said we could stop. Evan was out of the cruiser before I finished braking. "Sir, stay back," I called, grabbing my flashlight and medical kit. The man looked dazed, blood running down from a split in his scalp. One shoe missing, breath coming in short bursts. "There's someone else," he kept saying. "She went that way." She was screaming. I scanned the area instinctively. The desert stretched out, dark and uneven, swallowing sound almost immediately. No tracks, no movement. But the panic in his voice was real, raw, unfiltered, not something you fake convincingly. "Dispatch, we have one injured," I said into the radio. No response. I tried again. Static crackled, then faded into nothing. Evan was already moving toward the darkness, following the man's shaking hand. "She could be hurt," he said. "We can't just leave her." "Evan," I snapped. "Wait for backup." He hesitated, torn between training and instinct. Then a sound carried across the sand. A woman crying. Soft, broken, close, too close. That was the moment he broke the rule. He ran. The radio died completely as soon as he crossed the shoulder. Not static. Silence. Like it had been turned off somewhere far, beyond our reach. I shouted his name and followed, every instinct screaming at me to stop, to turn back, to let policy win. The ground felt wrong beneath my boots. Too soft. Too yielding. Like walking on ash or fine powder that hadn't fully settled. My watch buzzed violently against my wrist, then went dark, the screen blank. "Evan!" I called again. The crying stopped. I found him standing still, frozen mid-step, flashlight hanging uselessly at his side. The beam didn't reach as far as it should have. Everything beyond 10 feet dissolved into shadow, shapes bending at the edges of my vision. "How long have we been out here?" he asked quietly, voice stripped of bravado. I checked my dash cam, remotely through the cruiser system. The timestamp was unreadable, numbers overlapping themselves like they couldn't decide what they were supposed to be. The cruiser lights flickered in the distance, distorted, stretching and compressing like reflections on disturbed water. We turned back the way we came, or thought we did. The terrain shifted subtly with each step. Low rises appeared where the ground had been flat. The road no longer ran straight. I could feel it slipping sideways, like a thought you can't quite hold on to. Minutes stretched, or seconds. Time lost its edges. My breathing sounded too loud. Evan kept glancing behind us, flinching at nothing. When we finally reached pavement, the pickup was gone. No debris, no injured man, no footprints, no tire marks. Just empty road and the hum of insects returning like nothing had happened. The cruiser clock read 4:11. Dispatch came back online at 4:12, asking us to clear a call we'd never officially closed. They had no record of the rollover, no caller, no injured party, just our acknowledgement sitting alone in the system. I could have written it up as confusion, fatigue, equipment malfunction. Policy allowed that. It encouraged it, even. Survival demanded something else. I looked at Evan. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. His face had gone pale beneath the desert tan. He hadn't saved anyone. He'd barely saved himself. That night, standing under a sky that suddenly felt much closer, I chose survival over procedure. And I knew the next choice would cost more. We sat there longer than we should have, neither of us speaking. The silence felt earned, heavy with everything we didn't know how to say. Evan finally broke it, voice low. "I heard her," he said. "I know I did." "I know," I replied, and that was the truth that scared me most. Back at the station, the report system glitched twice before letting me submit anything. Fields reset themselves. Times corrected automatically. It was like the record wanted to erase the night before I finished typing it. I let it. Evan didn't sleep after that. Neither did I. The desert had crossed a line, and we'd followed it without realizing until it closed behind us. The rules hadn't protected us. They'd only delayed the inevitable. I understood then that the rules weren't shields. They were warnings, and we had just ignored one. When dawn finally came, it felt undeserved. Light didn't bring relief, only clarity. Evan avoided my eyes as we clocked out, like he was afraid I'd see something written there. He didn't yet understand himself. I wanted to tell him it would pass. I didn't. Driving home, I realized a moral line I'd crossed wasn't about lying a report. It was about accepting that some situations could not be handled, only survived. That choice sits with you differently. Heavier. I stayed on the force because someone had to remember what almost happened. Because if I left, the rules would be passed on without context, stripped of the fear that made them matter. The desert had taken note of us, and it wasn't finished. The next call would prove that. It wouldn't sound wrong. It wouldn't break protocol. It would ask us to do everything right, and that would make it far more dangerous. We just didn't know yet that the desert had learned how to wait, and how to choose the moment it mattered most. For both of us. No exceptions anymore. The next call came 3 nights later, and it came the right way. Correct cadence. Correct dispatcher ID. Correct routing. It even used my full call sign, pronounced the way supervisors preferred, not the shorthand we use in the field. That alone should have set me on edge. 7-2, respond to welfare check, mile marker 148. Possible stranded motorist. Evan stiffened beside me. That mile marker sat uncomfortably close to where Laura Bennett's car had been found. Close, but not forbidden. Clean enough to justify a response. Safe enough to silence instinct. "Copy," I said, hating how steady my voice sounded. As we drove, the radio filled with routine chatter. Other units checking traffic stops. Dispatch confirming plate numbers. Everything normal. Too normal. The desert rolled past, moonlight flattening the scrub into pale shapes that looked almost artificial. When we crested the rise, we saw the cruiser first. Black and white, parked at an angle on the shoulder. Light bar dark. Engine running. "That's not ours," Evan said. "No," I replied, "and it's not logged." As we slowed, the radio clicked again. Same dispatcher. 7-2, be advised, Unit 59 is on scene. Unit 59 was out of service. I knew that because I'd signed the damn memo myself. I pulled in behind the cruiser anyway. Policy demanded it. Survival argued otherwise. The moment we stopped, our radio went silent. Not dead, silent, like someone was holding their breath on the other end. The door of the other cruiser opened. A trooper stepped out wearing the right uniform, the right patches, the right hat. He even moved correctly. Weight balance the way academy instructors drilled into you. His flashlight beam swept once, twice, professional and controlled. "Evening," he called. "Glad you made it." His voice sounded exactly like mine. Evan froze. I felt something cold settle behind my eyes, a pressure like altitude sickness without the climb. The trooper smiled, friendly, reassuring, the way you do when you're trying to put a civilian at ease. "Dispatch said you had this," he continued. "Figured I'd wait." I checked his unit number. 59. The numbers were there, but wrong somehow. The font is slightly off, like a copy made from memory instead of reference. "What's the situation?" I asked. He tilted his head, mirroring me unconsciously. "Single female. Walked off into the desert. Same as last time." Evan inhaled sharply. "That information isn't public," I said. The trooper laughed. "Relax. We share reports." He used my phrasing, my inflection, words I'd said Evan during training rides. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. This thing wasn't copying sound. It was copying process. Another cruiser pulled up behind us. Then another. Different units. Different numbers. Same make. Same angle. Same idling engine. Each door opened in sequence. Troopers stepping out one by one. Familiar faces. Veterans. Supervisors. A lieutenant I hadn't seen in years. Every single one of them looked at Evan. "Training opportunity." The first one said, "You should come see this." "Procedure says we secure the scene first." Evan replied automatically, "Good." The thing wearing my face said, "Show us." They weren't hostile. They didn't rush us. They waited, patient, confident. The desert around us grew quiet, sound dampened like it had been wrapped in cloth. My watch flickered back on, displaying a time that meant nothing. "Evan," I said quietly, "stay with me." The thing smiled wider. "He's doing great," it said. "You trained him well." Evan took a step forward before he realized he was moving. The troopers shifted subtly, opening a path toward the darkness beyond the shoulder. Flashlights angled outward, not illuminating but directing. "Sir," Evan asked me. "They're right. If someone's missing—" "This isn't procedure," I said. "Look at the lights." He did. Every cruiser light reflected the same pattern, perfectly synchronized. No flicker. No variation. Machines don't do that. The thing's voice softened. "You don't want to hold him back," it said gently. "He's ready." I felt the weight of every decision I'd ever made pressed down on my chest. Training told me to assert command. Instinct told me to run. Neither option fit. "Dispatch," I said loudly, hoping volume could replace signal. "Confirm Unit 59. Every trooper answered at once. Confirmed. The word echoed, layered, wrong. Evan looked at me then, really looked, searching my face for certainty. The desert waited, breath held. I grabbed his arm. The thing frowned, and for the first time, it showed impatience. The smile slipped, just slightly, like a mask losing its grip. The troopers around us adjusted their stance in perfect unison, boots crunching on gravel that hadn't been there a moment before. I felt Evan tense under my hand, fear finally cutting through his discipline. "You taught him to hesitate," the thing said, and now its voice layered with others, dispatchers and instructors and partners long retired. "That's dangerous." "It's necessary," I said. "It's inefficient." The word echoed. Efficient. A word the department loved. A word Evan believed in. The thing leaned closer, wearing my face like it belonged there. "We can keep him safe," it said. "We already know how." Evan's radio crackled to life. His call sign appeared on the display, followed by a status update he hadn't entered. "Available." "Sir," he whispered. My radio... Turn it off, I said. He didn't. He couldn't. The sound coming through wasn't noise. It was instruction. Calm, reassuring, familiar. It walked him through steps, procedures, checklists he'd memorized until they lived in his bones. I understood then. This thing didn't hunt. It recruited. I pulled Evan back hard enough that he stumbled. The desert reacted instantly. Lights flared too bright. Shadows stretched. The troopers took one synchronized step forward. Unauthorized action, they said together. I drew my weapon, not to fire, to break the pattern. Metal scraped leather, loud and wrong. The sound shattered the symmetry. The thing recoiled. For a split second, everything blurred. Cruisers flickered like reflections on broken glass. Voices overlapped, lost their rhythm. I seized a moment, dragging Evan toward our unit. We slammed the doors, and I floored it. The road straightened behind us like it had never been at all. The radio came back in a rush of overlapping calls, confusion, real voices trying to catch up. Neither of us spoke for miles. When Evan finally did, his voice was hollow. It knew my name, he said. It knew what to say. Yes, I answered. What was it? I didn't look at him. A test, I said, and an invitation. In the rear-view mirror, the desert stayed dark and still, like always had. But I knew better now. It wasn't copying us anymore. It was improving. We drove until the sky began to pale, neither of us willing to be the first to suggest stopping. The desert looked ordinary again in daylight. Scrub and stone laid out plainly, like a crime scene after the crowd has gone home. That almost made it worse. There was no sign of the cruisers, no tire tracks, no evidence that anything unusual had happened at all. Evan didn't speak. Not when we logged back into service. Not when dispatch asked us to confirm our status. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight, hands folded together like he was afraid they'd start shaking again if he let them separate. At the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The normal sounds of morning shift filtered in. Boots on concrete, radios chirping, coffee pouring into paper cups. Life continuing, indifferent to whatever had almost taken place out there. I started the report the way I always did. Time, location, nature of call. The cursor blinked patiently, waiting for me to fill in details that didn't exist anymore. Every time I tried to type what we'd seen, the system lagged, froze, reset fields without warning. When I reopened the file, entire paragraphs were gone. Evan hovered behind me, silent. I could feel his eyes on the screen, on my hands. Put in what you can, he said finally. Just put in something. So I did a welfare check, unable to locate subject, cleared without incident. The language was clean, bloodless, familiar. It felt like erasing something while it was still warm. A supervisor stopped by my desk halfway through. He didn't sit down, didn't ask questions, just glanced at the screen and nodded. Keep it simple, he said. No need to speculate. I'm not, I replied. He gave me a look that suggested we both knew that wasn't the point. Good, he said and walked away. Evan was reassigned before the end of the week. No explanation. No paperwork we could see. His name vanished from my schedule like it had never been there. When I asked, I was told it was temporary. Then I was told it was for his own good. I tried calling him. Once. Twice. The calls went straight to voicemail. His locker stayed untouched for days, then emptied overnight. Someone else took the space without comment. The official story was stress. Critical incident response. Burnout. It fit neatly into the department's vocabulary, a word-shaped box to put him in so no one had to look too closely. I filed a supplemental report 3 nights later. I included the radio silence, the conflicting timestamps, the unauthorized units. I attached dash cam footage that showed nothing but flickering light and empty road. When I checked the system the next morning, the supplemental report was gone. Not rejected, not returned. Gone. So was the footage. I started asking careful questions about Laura Bennett, about other incidents near the same mile markers, about response gaps and missing time logs. Every question was answered politely and deflected efficiently. records incomplete, data corruption, equipment malfunction. The desert is hard on electronics. I'd heard all of it before. I just hadn't heard it all at once. One night, long after Evan stopped answering messages, I sat alone in my cruiser and scrolled through old reports. Years' worth. Patterns emerged when you stopped looking for conclusions and started looking for omissions. Calls closed too cleanly. Units reassigned abruptly. Troopers who transferred early, retired quietly, or disappeared from the roster altogether. The system didn't document the truth. It managed it. I realized then that what we encountered wasn't new. It was familiar enough to have protocols built around it, even if no one ever named it. Avoidance disguised as procedure. Silence mistaken for safety. Evan became a ghost in the building. People spoke about him in the past tense without realizing it. I overheard someone say he'd moved back closer to family. Someone else said he'd taken a desk job. No one agreed on the details. That was the most unsettling part. I tried to visit him once. Drove to the address I had on file. The house was empty. For rent sign out front. Neighbors said no one had lived there in months. I stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary, listening to the wind move through trees that weren't native to the area. It felt like waiting for a response that wasn't coming. Back on patrol, the radio behaved, almost aggressively normal. Dispatch used my name more often than necessary. Supervisors checked in with casual friendliness. Everything ran smoothly, like the system was compensating. I stopped trying to file the real report. Instead, I started keeping my own records. Times written down by hand. Locations marked on personal maps. Names noted where the system left blanks. It felt paranoid at first. Then it felt necessary. Some nights, I swore I heard Evan's voice on the radio. Just once. Just my name, spoken the way he used to say it when he had a question. I never answered. I understood then what had happened to him wasn't a single event. It was a process. Something that began with imitation and ended with replacement. The desert didn't take people the way stories suggested. It integrated them. And the department, whether intentionally or not, made space for that. There was no official acknowledgement, no debrief, no closure. Evan's absence settled into the cracks of daily routine like dust, invisible unless you disturbed it. I stayed quiet. I stayed employed. I followed the rules that still worked and avoided the ones that didn't. I learned how to write reports that satisfied requirements without inviting questions. But something fundamental had shifted. I no longer believed the system existed to protect us. It existed to endure. And it knew exactly what it was doing. The night I accepted that, I realized survival wasn't just about making it through encounters on the road. It was about learning how to live with what you couldn't file, couldn't prove, couldn't even say without sounding unhinged. The desert had shown me one truth. The department had confirmed another. Between the two, I understood why people stayed, why they adapted, why they learned new rules instead of fixing the old ones. Because once you see how easily someone can be erased, you start measuring every decision differently. And that was only the beginning of living with it. After Evan was gone, the job didn't change on paper. Same routes, same shifts, same expectations. But the way I worked those nights was different in ways I couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't been there. I stopped driving with the windows cracked. I kept the radio volume lower, just enough to hear without letting it fill the cab. I checked my mirrors more often, not for traffic, but for patterns that didn't belong. I didn't patrol the desert anymore. I negotiated with it. New rules formed quietly the way the old ones had. Never linger after clearing a call, even if paperwork wasn't finished. Never acknowledge voices you couldn't place immediately. Never trust a familiar tone over an unfamiliar fact. I didn't write these down. I didn't share them. I let them settle into muscle memory, where they could do the most good. Isolation sharpened everything. Without Evan, the passenger seat felt wrong, like a missing limb. I caught myself glancing over to explain things that didn't need explaining anymore. The silence between calls stretched longer than it used to, heavy with thoughts I couldn't outrun. Guilt became a constant companion. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. It sat with me during traffic stops, during routine assists, during the long drive between mile markers where nothing ever seemed to happen. I replayed moments over and over, wondering if I could have made a different call, said something sooner, broken a rule before it broke him. I stayed on the job because leaving felt like another kind of erasure. If I walked away, Evan would become a story with no witness, a gap no one remembered to ask about. Staying meant carrying the weight forward, even when it bent me out of shape. Some nights, the desert tested the new rules gently. A voice on the radio that almost matched dispatch. Headlights cresting a hill in perfect alignment, then disappearing. I didn't engage. I didn't investigate. I documented what I could and let the rest pass through me like weather. Other nights, it pressed harder. I learned to recognize the feeling just before something went wrong. The air would go flat. Sound would thin out. My own heartbeat would seem too loud. When that happened, I slowed down. I breathed. I waited. The desert didn't like to be rushed. I stopped trusting the system entirely. Not because it was malicious, but because it was practical. It smoothed over anything that threatened continuity. It preferred clean narratives, even when they weren't true. Understanding that made it easier to operate inside it without being consumed. I started marking my own maps again, not official ones. Personal. I noted places where time felt slippery, where calls tended to loop, where my instincts screamed louder than training. The patterns grew clearer the longer I looked at them. Not neat, not predictable, but consistent. Sometimes, during the quietest hours, I wondered how many others were doing the same thing. How many troopers, rangers, deputies across stretches of empty land had learned similar lessons and kept them to themselves. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt that kind of unease, you already know why we stay quiet. Speaking up doesn't make it safer. It just makes it harder to keep going. The department praised me for consistency, for reliability, for never calling out. They trusted me with solo coverage on nights others avoided. I accepted without comment. It was easier that way. I avoided certain mile markers entirely, took longer routes, logged detours as efficiency adjustments. No one questioned it. The desert noticed. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when I felt almost normal again. A clean traffic stop, a grateful motorist, a sunrise that painted the land in soft gold instead of menace. Those moments mattered. They reminded me why I'd taken the job in the first place. But even then, I never forgot. Evan's absence followed me like a shadow I couldn't quite outrun. I'd hear his laugh in the static sometimes, or catch myself using phrases I'd taught him. The desert never tried to mimic him again. That felt intentional, like restraint, like patience. Living with it meant accepting that fear didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it settled in quietly, rearranged your habits, and waited. I learned to respect that, to listen without reacting, to choose survival over certainty every time. I don't tell this story because I expect understanding. I tell it because silence is weight, and carrying it alone changes you. If you've ever driven a long stretch of road at night and felt like something was watching from just beyond the headlights, you've brushed up against the same truth. You didn't imagine it. You just didn't engage. That's how most people live with it, by not looking too closely. The desert never came for me the way it came for Evan. It didn't need to. It already had what it wanted. Awareness, compliance, a witness who knew better than to interfere. I stayed because leaving wouldn't have undone anything. Staying meant adapting, even if that adaptation felt like a quiet surrender. I followed the rules that mattered and ignored the ones that pretended everything was normal. Over time, the nights blurred together. The fear dulled into something like vigilance. Not comfort, never comfort, just balance. I understood then that this wasn't about bravery or weakness. It was about learning where the edges were and choosing not to cross them unless absolutely necessary. The desert respected that in its own way. The guilt never left, but it changed shape. It became a reminder instead of a wound, a reason to pay attention, a reason to keep going. I thought I'd reached some kind of equilibrium. I was wrong, because balance only works when both sides agree to it. And the desert, as it turned out, had been watching me adjust, learning my patterns, waiting for the moment I'd have no choice but to break my own rules. I used to believe the desert was changing, that something had awakened, grown stronger, spread farther than it used to. That belief made it easier to cope. If the threat was external, then it could be mapped, tracked, contained. Something you could draw a line around and say, this is where it begins. That belief was wrong. The desert isn't expanding. Awareness is. Once you notice the patterns, you can't stop seeing them. Once you learn what the rules are actually for, you understand they were never meant to keep you safe. They were meant to slow you down, to buy time, to give the illusion that order still mattered out here. The land hasn't changed. We have. Every mile marker I avoided, every detour I logged, every call I ignored wasn't protecting me from something new. It was delaying contact with something old. Patient, methodical, something that doesn't rush because it doesn't need to. I realized that the night I almost stopped again. It was past midnight, the hour where the highway feels suspended between days. No traffic, no wind, just my headlights carving a narrow tunnel through darkness. A figure stood ahead on the shoulder, barely visible at first. No reflective gear, no vehicle, just a shape where one shouldn't be. I slowed instinctively, foot hovering over the brake. The old rules screamed in my head. Never stop, never engage, never assume urgency equals truth. The figure didn't wave, didn't move. It just stood there, facing the road, as if it knew exactly how far my lights reached and chose to stand just inside them. My radio crackled. 7-2, dispatch said calmly. Are you seeing that? I almost answered. That's the danger no one talks about. Not fear. Familiarity. The way authority can sound comforting when you're tired and alone. The way a calm voice can override instinct faster than panic ever could. I didn't respond. I kept driving. In the mirror, the figure didn't move. That's when it finally settled into place. Not as a revelation, but as a resignation. The understanding that this thing doesn't need to chase, doesn't need to frighten, doesn't need to reveal itself fully. It only needs to wait for the moment someone decides to trust the wrong signal. That's what happened to Evan. Not all at once. Not dramatically. He didn't vanish into the dark screaming. He was guided, reassured, shown procedures he already believed in, spoken in voices he respected. He wasn't taken because he was reckless. He was taken because he was good, because he believed the system existed to help, because he trusted authority to tell him when something was wrong, because he thought doing everything right would protect him. That's the part one needs you to understand. Rules don't stop what's out there. They delay it. They give you time to pass through unnoticed, provided you don't draw attention to yourself by questioning too much or caring too deeply. They are camouflage, not armor. The department knows this, whether they admit it or not. That's why the reports vanish. Why assignments change quietly. Why certain incidents are smoothed into nothing. It's not a conspiracy. It's survival through denial. Systems don't fight what they can't control. They adapt around it. So do people. If you're listening to this while driving at night, I want you to pay attention to how the road feels, not how it looks. Notice when silence settles too evenly, when your radio sounds a little too clear, when a call comes through that fits procedure perfectly but doesn't feel earned. If you see someone on the shoulder where there shouldn't be anyone, ask yourself why they chose that exact spot. If a detour appears that isn't marked anywhere official, ask yourself who benefits from you taking it. And if a calm voice tells you everything is under control, remember that calm is easy to imitate. I'm not telling you never to help. I'm telling you to understand the cost of assuming you're the first one to encounter a situation. You rarely are. Others came before you. Some of them didn't come back the way they left. The desert doesn't punish curiosity. It exploits predictability. It learned our procedures because we repeat them. It learned our voices because we trust them. It learned our authority structures because we lean on them when things feel uncertain. It doesn't need to be violent. Violence draws attention. It needs compliance. I still patrol those roads. Not because I believe I can fix anything, but because awareness matters. Someone has to remember what the rules were meant for. Someone has to notice when the patterns shift again, because they do shift. Not often, not dramatically. Just enough to catch the next person who assumes tonight will be like every other night. I don't know what ultimately happens to those who are taken fully. I only know what's left behind. Gaps, reassignments, stories that don't line up, voices that sound familiar until you really listen. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear Evan laughing on the radio, not calling for help, not repeating a call sign, just laughing softly, like he's remembering something I can't quite reach anymore. I never answer. That's the last rule I learned. Never answer something that already knows your name. If you've made it this far, if you're still listening, it's because some part of you recognizes this feeling. The unease that doesn't go away when the lights come on. The sense that certain places aren't dangerous because of what happens there, but because of what waits there. That awareness will stay with you now. I'm sorry for that. I wouldn't have shared this if I thought silence was safer. It isn't. Silence just makes it easier to repeat the same mistakes. So here's the warning, as plainly as I can give it. At night, don't assume the road is neutral. Don't stop just because someone tells you to. And don't trust authority blindly when the situation feels rehearsed. If something wants you to act quickly, ask yourself why. The desert doesn't rush. Neither should you. When this ends, when the story fades out and you go back to whatever you were doing, you'll probably tell yourself it was just that, a story. Something unsettling but contained. That's normal. That's how people protect themselves. But the next time you drive alone at night and your radio crackles a little too cleanly, or you pass a cruiser that doesn't quite sit right on the shoulder, remember this. Pay attention to what doesn't demand your trust. That's usually where the truth is hiding. I'm still out here, still driving the same roads, still following rules no one writes down anymore. The desert hasn't tried to take me again. Not yet, but I know better than to believe that means I'm safe. It just means I haven't been chosen. And now that you know what to listen for, neither have you. I didn't plan to keep talking after that. I told myself the warning was enough, that anyone who needed to hear it would hear it, and anyone who didn't would dismiss it as coincidence, fiction, stress. That's how people protect themselves, by labeling discomfort and moving on. But awareness doesn't work that way. Once it settles in, it demands context. It pulls at loose threads. It asks questions when you're trying to sleep, when you're driving familiar roads, when you hear a voice that sounds right but arrives at the wrong moment. Awareness doesn't let you stop at understanding. It pushes you toward recognition. I started noticing how often people assume danger announces itself. Sirens, shouting, sudden movement, violence. We're conditioned to respond to spikes, not patterns. But nothing I encountered out there relied on surprise in that way. It relied on patience, on repetition, on the quiet confidence that comes from knowing most people will do exactly what they've been trained to do. The desert understands systems better than we give it credit for. It understands flow. It understands compliance. It understands that authority doesn't need to be enforced when it can be suggested. I watched that realization play out again and again in small, almost invisible ways. A trooper ignoring a call that felt wrong, then second-guessing himself for hours afterward. A dispatcher repeating a clarification that no one had asked for. A supervisor reminding everyone to stick to protocol after an incident no one could quite describe. None of it raised alarms. That was the point. If the desert wanted to hurt people, it wouldn't bother with mimicry. It wouldn't waste time learning our procedures or memorizing our voices. Violence is inefficient. It leaves evidence. It invites scrutiny. What I saw preferred something cleaner. Something that left just enough doubt to keep everyone moving forward. I realized, slowly, that I wasn't being watched the way prey is watched. I was being evaluated. Every time I didn't stop. Every time I rerouted. Every time I refused to answer a call that sounded perfect on paper, but wrong in my gut, I could feel the tension shift. Not anger, not retaliation. Adjustment, like something recalibrating expectations. That's when the guilt changed again. At first, it was about Evan, about what I could have done differently, about whether hesitation had saved me at the cost of him. But later, it became something heavier, the guilt of knowledge, of knowing that staying silent protected me while leaving others exposed. I thought about quitting more than once, not dramatically, not in a moment of panic. Just quietly, during long drives home when the sun was coming up and the world felt almost forgiving again. But every time I considered it, I pictured someone else in my seat. Someone newer. Someone who still believed procedure was armor. Someone like Evan. So I stayed, not because I believed I could stop anything, but because presence mattered, awareness mattered. Even unspoken, it altered outcomes. A delayed response here, a rerouted patrol there. Small disruptions to a pattern that thrived on predictability. I don't know if that counts as resistance. It might just be avoidance refined into instinct. But out there, that's often the same thing. You might be wondering why I'm telling you all this now. Why I didn't stop with the warning. Why I'm still pushing, still adding layers when ambiguity would be safer. It's because the last thing the desert taught me wasn't about rules or systems or mimicry. It was about witnesses. Things change when they're observed long enough. Not immediately, not dramatically, but awareness is weight. It alters behavior. It introduces friction. And whatever is out there doesn't like friction. I felt that shift recently. Not in a confrontation. Not in a call. In absence. The radio has been quiet in a way that feels intentional. Not dead. Not broken. Just restrained. Calls route normally. Units respond as expected. Mile markers behave. For someone without context, everything would look fine. For me, it feels like a pause. That's what unsettles me now. Not activity. Not mimicry. Silence with posture. Silence that feels like consideration. I think the desert is deciding something. If you're still listening, still following this thread, I need you to understand that none of this requires belief. Belief is optional. Awareness isn't. You don't have to accept my conclusions to benefit from my caution. Just remember this. Systems work because most people trust them implicitly. That trust is useful, necessary even, but it becomes dangerous when it overrides perception. If you're driving at night and something feels staged, slow down. Not physically necessarily, mentally. Ask yourself who benefits from you acting quickly. Ask yourself whether urgency is earned or performed. If you hear a voice telling you everything is under control, notice whether it's giving you space to think or pushing you to comply. Authority that rushes you rarely has your best interests in mind. And if you ever feel that sense of being gently guided rather than forced, understand that guidance can be a trap. I don't know how many people have brushed against this thing without realizing it. Probably more than we'll ever count. Most interactions don't escalate. Most end with nothing more than a story that doesn't quite make sense and a lingering discomfort people chalk up to fatigue. But occasionally, someone steps too far, responds too cleanly, trusts too completely. Those are the ones that disappear into paperwork gaps and reassignment notices and explanations that never quite line up. I still don't know exactly what happens to them. I don't know if they're absorbed, replaced, or simply erased in a way that makes room for something else. I only know that whatever comes back wears familiarity like camouflage. That's why mimicry matters. Not because it's frightening, but because it's convincing. Fear makes people hesitate. Familiarity makes them follow. I want you to think about that the next time you hear a voice you trust telling you to do something that doesn't quite align with what you're seeing. Think about how easy it is to mistake recognition for safety. I've learned to live with the knowledge that I'm not protected. Not by rules. Not by training. Not by the badge. I'm protected, if at all, by attention. By restraint. By refusing to be predictable. That's a hard way to live. It strips comfort out of routine. It makes even quiet nights feel provisional. But it's honest, and honesty matters more than comfort out here. The desert hasn't confronted me again. That doesn't reassure me. It confirms what I already suspect. That I'm no longer interesting in the way it prefers. I don't follow clean lines anymore. I don't respond the way I'm supposed to. I become inefficient. That's probably why I'm still here. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's not fear. Fear fades. It's not even caution. Caution dulls over time. What matters is attention. The willingness to notice when something fits too well, when a situation feels rehearsed, when authority feels performative. The world isn't as random as we like to think. Patterns exist whether we acknowledge them or not. The desert just happens to be honest about that. I don't expect this warning to change anything immediately. Most warnings don't. They sit quietly until the moment they're needed, then surface when instinct catches up to memory. Maybe that moment never comes for you. I hope it doesn't. But if it does, if you find yourself alone on a long stretch of road at night, with a decision that feels small but heavy, remember this. You don't owe compliance to anything that hasn't earned your trust. And trust isn't granted by tone, uniform, or procedure. It's granted by alignment. I'll keep doing my job as long as I'm allowed to. I'll keep driving the roads I know and avoiding the ones that feel like questions. I'll keep following rules that were never written down and breaking the ones that pretend everything is fine. Because living with this knowledge means accepting that safety isn't guaranteed. It's negotiated. And sometimes the most important choice you'll ever make is the one to keep driving past something that wants you to stop. That's all I have left to say. For now,